In January 2023, Fire Emblem Engage, a new entry to the Fire Emblem series, has been released on the Nintendo Switch. Considering how well received its predecessor, Fire Emblem Three Houses, was, one might say that expectations were pretty high. Although I did not play all of the Fire Emblem games ever since they became available to players in the West, I've always had a certain appreciation or even love for this series. My entry point was Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones on the Game Boy Advance, and it is still one of my favorite games of all time. Three Houses was also fantastic, but certain aspects of it make it a little hard to replay once you already finished the game, at least for me. Now, playing Fire Emblem Engage, I must say, in terms of gameplay and mechanics, it's absolutely amazing. In case you don't know, Fire Emblem is a turn-based strategy role-playing game in a fantasy setting, where your characters can level up and get stronger the more they fight. And boy oh boy is it fun! You play as the Divine Dragon, a young man or woman who awakens after a 1,000-year slumber without any memories, when the continent Ilios suddenly gets attacked by the corrupted, who are practically zombies. It becomes your mission to find out what is going on and to fix everything. Along the way, you gain more and more companions to join your little army. Also helping out on your quest are the Emblem Rings, which you can assign to your party members to summon the heroes from previous Fire Emblem games to help out in various ways. These are what sets Engage's gameplay apart from the other Fire Emblem games. Speaking of which, let's have a look at the gameplay. As in many of the previous titles, you get the option to play in either casual or classic mode. When one of your characters gets defeated in casual mode, they retreat, and you can use them again in the next battle. In classic mode, however, there is permadeath, meaning characters who fall in battle die and disappear from the game, unless it's main characters, who still show up in cutscenes etc., but remain unavailable for battle. In case you mess up, you can use the time crystal to rewind time though, which is a feature that was already present in previous Fire Emblem titles. It allows you to go back several turns to rethink your strategy, which might make things a little too forgiving on normal difficulty. Depending on the selected difficulty level, you can only use this feature a set amount of times during a battle. You even get to use it automatically when the Divine Dragon dies, which is a change to titles like Echoes, where the protagonist's bucket kicking would result in an immediate game over screen, despite a rewind feature being present as well. On normal difficulty, you can use it an infinite amount of times, and undo an ally's death immediately, which almost makes choosing classic mode kinda moot. But I personally still recommend classic mode regardless, because there's just a different feel to it. There's simply more weight to the decisions you make on the battlefield, and when characters fall in battle.
Are you lost? Divine One, where are you? I want to say one last goodbye.
If you're very old school and don't want to use the time crystal at all, you can always restart a battle from the beginning, if you don't like the idea of continuing with losses on your side. But with 35 playable characters, you should have enough allies to go through the game, even if you decide to bite the bullet and accept the companion's demise.
I'm sorry, Divine One.
Helping at avoiding a comrade's death is taking the battlefield's terrain into account. Like forest tiles, raise the chance of dodging an enemy's attack. The weapon triangle has returned, where axes, spears and swords follow the rock, paper, scissors principle. Axes have an advantage over spears, spears beat swords, and swords triumph over axes. It's actually one of my favorite features in Fire Emblem, and I always feel like something is missing when it's not being used, like in Echoes or Three Houses. It adds a fun layer of strategy on top of which classes to use against what enemy. And there are also special weapons which have an advantage over certain enemy types, like certain swords being good against heavily armored enemies, or certain lances dealing extra damage to riders. A new feature in this game is that when a weapon with an advantage over another is used, it will break the opposing unit, causing them to be unable to perform a counterattack for the remainder of the turn. Characters dealing the killing blow on an enemy always get extra XP, which is also a fun part of the planning, as you want to make sure that the weaker members of your party have a chance to get stronger. So oftentimes part of the battle includes damaging a foe with a higher level character and then finishing them off with a lower level one, so they can get a little XP boost. After each battle, you can walk around the battlefield, talk to your soldiers, and find materials that are lying around. And also adopt stray animals that go to your hub and help out finding materials for you every day. When comparing this game to its predecessor, Three Houses, a lot of things have been streamlined, in a good way. What makes revisiting Three Houses a little difficult for me personally is the whole rigmarole that is happening between battles. Running around at the academy, talking to people, trying to recruit them, the whole calendar system, etc, etc. Fire Emblem Engage condenses the entire thing. Instead of the academy, you now have the Somniel, which is a floating island where you and your allies live and hang out. Here you can talk to your friends, give them gifts, play mini-games, do activities that buff your characters, visit shops, train your characters to get some XP, and more. The thing is, it feels a lot quicker and snappier than the Three Houses Academy. There's also no calendar system, so you can just go straight to the world map and move on to the next chapter. You can also take a nap in your bed, and then have so-called wake-up events, where a party member stares at you while you sleep, and wake up, which is not weird at all. One big difference in most Fire Emblem games that I personally love, but that might be a little controversial: weapons don't break. In most of the other Fire Emblem games, you can only use weapons a set amount of times until they're gone forever. In Engage, however, the only items that do break are healing staffs. A feature that has returned though: you can level up your weapons. Using materials you gain after battle, you can visit your smith and make them stronger. You can also infuse them with one of the emblem's attributes, thus giving them unique perks. And speaking of emblems, the Engage in Fire Emblem Engage stands for a new feature. You can equip your party members with rings that contain the spirits or essences or whatever of previous Fire Emblem heroes. Like Lyn from Blazing Blade, or Marth from the very first Fire Emblem. The characters that have these rings equipped can engage, which raises their stats and gives them special abilities, like area of effect attacks. These effects will be active for a couple of turns, and they allow for further strategies. You can use them to complement one of your character's shortcomings. For example, knights are robust, but can't move very far per round, but if you equip them with Sigurd, their movement range gets multiplied. I was a bit skeptical about this at first, because in my opinion, it added an additional layer onto a system that was pretty flawless to begin with, and I was worried that it might overcomplicate things. However, I can say that it actually is quite fun to use, but I could also live without it regardless. Outside of the main chapter that progresses the story, there are also the so-called paralogs, optional chapters that allow you to recruit new characters or to increase the bond with one of your emblems. And of course skirmishes, which are a little like random encounters on the world map. The battles are as awesome as ever and require tactical thinking, from which characters you take into battle, over which emblems and weapons they equip, to which characters get to do a finishing blow to an enemy to earn an extra bunch of experience points. It's just so much fun. And you don't even need to worry about leveling your characters wrong. Once one of them reaches level 10 in the base class, they can use a Master Seal to change to a powerful advanced class. If you realize that you made the wrong choice in that regard, you can always use a second seal to change it to a different one. By the end, you'll be able to purchase as many of them as you need, and they can even be used to reset a character's level once they reach the maximum. For example, when you have a warrior level 20, you can use a second seal to make them a warrior level 1 again. But their stats stay the same. That way you can basically level up attributes ad infinitum. During battle, you can also use the auto battle feature to let the AI take care of everything, which in theory can be handy if you just want to grind some XP in a skirmish, for example. Unfortunately, my experience with auto battle was less than optimal, because the few times I tried it, just for the sake of trying it, it had the tendency to treat my archers like invincible one-man armies, and let them basically move away from the group to tackle on hordes of enemies by themselves, which, surprise surprise, is not exactly a great idea. So 99% of the time, it's probably best to just stick with commanding your troops manually. The game's difficulty is not particularly high, as you can mostly breeze through the main missions without much effort. Bigger challenges can be found in optional battles and skirmishes, and some of the paralogs. Skirmishes on the map scale with your level, so sometimes you will actually feel a little overwhelmed, like when you seem to be surrounded by an endless onslaught of dragon riders hiding in the fog of war. Additionally, from the Somniel you can access the Tower of Trials, which gives you several different optional maps that you need to beat in succession without your characters being healed in between. The difficulty for those can be selected, so you can create an insane challenge for yourself if you feel like it. Depending on the difficulty selected, beating these trials rewards you with materials that you can use to improve your Engage weapons. From that tower you also have the option to partake in multiplayer stuff, but since I don't like multiplayer in general, I can't really tell you anything about that. Apologies. What makes a return, of course, is the support system, where characters can befriend one another to help each other out during combat, like with chain attacks when they are close by and you attack an enemy. And you can watch their growing relationships in cutscenes, which help fleshing out their personalities and backstories. Relating to cutscenes, let's have a look at the game's overall presentation. As with pretty much every Fire Emblem, the game's soundtrack is amazing, and in terms of graphics, it's a huge step up to Three Houses, and it looks quite decent for a Switch game. The environments in part are fairly detailed, and some of the areas that you get to walk around in, and the Somniel in particular, are quite pretty, with nice coloring and a nice animated look to them. What I especially like is that the music is dynamic. What that means is, you basically have a track playing on the map, and once you engage in combat, the same track continues playing, but it changes to match the combat scenario.
Gotcha. All flowers eventually wilt.
This feature was already present in Three Houses, but in older Fire Emblem games, the field music would stop once you engage an enemy. Battle music would start, and once the battle is over, the field music would start again. And this was always a little annoying, so I'm really happy they keep up with this trend. One musical track that sticks out like a sore thumb, though, is the one in the opening cutscene. Literally, every time I boot the game, I get inverted goosebumps when this song starts playing. I hate it when medieval fantasy games for some reason have one pop rock track that doesn't fit the game's score. It was already annoying when Dragon's Dogma did it in 2012, and yep, it still is. One tiny thing that I adore is the loading screens, where you can see tiny pixel art representations of the characters who are currently in your party running around, which is freaking adorable. The story is mostly told in proper cutscenes, which I'll get more into a little later on. But let me say already that they, and the talky bits in general, go on a little too long for my taste before you get to play again. Then there are also conversation scenes between characters, which are mostly them standing around without much else happening, even though their dialogue might say differently. Characters might state that they're reading or eating something, or even fighting a bear, but it's still just the characters doing some basic animations, without books, food, or bears being visible. It's also in those where some lifelessness in the background becomes apparent. There is a lack of any kind of motion, like rivers not flowing, and that seems quite weak. These issues give the game a bit of a low-budget visual novel feel at times, but I find it forgivable because, well, these aren't the focus of the game, and don't serve to move the story along. They merely show how characters bond and interact, and for that, they're okay, and they still look prettier than in Three Houses. The voice acting can be hit or miss, as it tends to be with Japanese RPGs being localized.
Guess I got carried away there. You gotta admit, though, these muscles of yours are something else.
I'm personally not particularly picky when it comes to these performances, and don't mind non-great voice acting, as long as they don't stick out too much.
Woo! Weekend picnic!
There are some issues I have, but they have less to do with the delivery, and more with the writing itself, but more on that later. So, all in all, I would say this game has a ton of content, is incredibly fun, has good visual qualities, and is accompanied by a wonderful dynamic soundtrack. And it would probably be my new favorite in the series, if it weren't for three tiny problems. I really don't like the art style, or most of the characters, or the writing, the dialogue, and the story. The story about the Divine Dragon who reawakens after 1,000-year slumber and who has to gather allies from the neighboring nations in order to defeat the evil Fell Dragon and fight the nation that worships said Fell Dragon, unfortunately ain't nothing to write home about. This must be the weakest plot in a Fire Emblem game that I have seen up to this point. The plots in Fire Emblem games are usually quite good. They tend to have an important aspect that this game decided to drop: politics. Yes, Fire Emblem games usually include political intrigue and interesting character dynamics. Three Houses did an amazing job at portraying a group of friends who basically end up fighting and killing each other over, when you break it down, political differences. The Blazing Blade and Secret Stones also both had evil ancient powers lurking as a threat in the background, but politics and schemes were still the main focus. Here, on the other hand, the story is mostly a very run-of-the-mill good versus evil plot, with a couple of twists that you can see coming from a mile away. And as I mentioned before, it is told in cutscenes that are quite cheesy and just go on for too long. I believe there are a couple of scenes at the beginning that drag on for about 20 minutes before you get to play again. And that is just unfortunate because very little is told in these sequences. I admit, not liking these character designs is definitely a Phil problem. And a lot of people probably disagree with me on this. But let me stress, I don't think the style is bad by any means. I'm just saying that this is simply not for me. And maybe I'd find this to be less of a problem if the title of this game wasn't Fire Emblem. The GBA Fire Emblems were my introduction to the series, and they had both a tone and an art style that I really loved. By comparison, looking at the facial designs from back then, you can see how different every character looks. They have different head shapes, jawlines, noses and cheekbones. And also very importantly, several of them have facial hair. Disregarding the crazy hair colors, what I appreciated about the designs of older Fire Emblem games was that they felt more grounded and quote-unquote realistic. To me, the facial designs in Engage are just too similar looking, as the main differences are just in terms of haircuts and eyes. The faces are too smooth and lack a certain edge that I want in my Fire Emblem characters. Also, I find that many of the outfits are just over-designed. The dresses and outfits that some of these characters are wearing are so overly elaborate and cartoony, they just seem very impractical. Look at her! From behind she looks like an onion! I especially get confused by the way the characters look when they engage. I mean, I look at them and I have no idea what is going on. Are those turbines? What are those floating things? As someone who's not overly versed in anime, I'd say this has gotten too anime for me. I'd go as far as saying that comparing this game's style to the previous entries is similar to comparing how the style changed between Xenoblade Chronicles and its sequel, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. There were several moments right in the intro cutscene where I immediately went, oh no. I saw this character, for instance, and just thought, this design looks weird. What's with all the balls? And the way the characters fight is so overly stylized, and the moment that gave me inverted goosebumps and made my skin crawl was this.
The time has come! Now, as one! Emblem Engage!
But I digress. From what I've gathered, Fire Emblem's art style has always been inspired by what was considered the mainstream in manga or anime over the past decade. So it's very much possible that my entry point in the series, the Sacred Stones, happened to be during a period where a more grown-up and possibly edgier look was popular. However, ever since Fire Emblem Awakening, the art style and even character tropes have moved in a direction that is just not my thing. Except for maybe Echo's Shadow of Valentia. That style is great. Instead, the characters started to look mostly like teenagers and teen idols wearing battle gear, with tropes one might expect from a modern generic fantasy anime show. Gone are the days of men and women from all walks of life, grizzled veterans and knights who have seen too much. I miss characters that are in an age range from 25 to 45. Or characters that have stubble or a beard. Characters that aren't pretty boys or bombshells or kawaii! I mean, there are some mature characters, even with beards and wrinkles, like Vander, but his beard looks kind of fake. And he has a very young face. And there just seems to be no in-between. The characters are either teenagers or elderly. It feels like the designs needed to follow one specific type of beauty standard. Like, every character has to look pretty, but in one specific way. And that's why all the faces look pretty much the same. Imagine you were making a movie about a group of beautiful people, and then you cast variants of Timothée Chalamet and Anya Taylor-Joy as every single character, while ignoring that beauty has many faces. The game style is too stereotypical for me and seems to target an audience that I'm not a part of. This makes it especially strange when you consider that Fire Emblem Engage is supposed to be a celebration of the Fire Emblem series as a whole, so one would assume that it's for longtime fans, as they're given all the heroes from the entries they have grown to love. So why is it an art style that appears to be aimed at a younger generation that may never even have played a Fire Emblem before? Unfortunately, the tropes that are dialed up to 11 not only apply to the character designs, but the characters' personalities themselves. In Fire Emblem games, there is a recurring trope that a young gifted child joins your group of heroes. And of course, there are always a handful of slightly quirky or silly characters who may provide some comic relief with their behavior that might be considered out of the ordinary, and that is fine. However, once you start playing Engage, after the intro, the first thing you are greeted with is this.
Huh?
Whoa. Tell me you're seeing this. The Divine Dragon is finally awake!
Hey, hold on!
So again, my mind immediately went, oh no, as you have two annoying kid characters as a part of your team right off the bat. But as I mentioned before, I reminded myself that having a kid or two in your group is nothing unusual. Then I progressed through the story.
I know Father told me to hide, but how can I? I have to do my part too.
Oh no.
Do you have room on your team for me?
Oh no.
That would be me, the second princess of Illusia, Thracia! Now then, hello, everybody!
Alright, so this game has too many annoying kid characters. But usually, characters in a Fire Emblem game are decently or well written. Going back to Three Houses, I may not have been a fan of the characters' designs, but I grew to really like their personalities. So, how are the characters in Engage?
Finally! Horsey, you stopped! Where were you taking me?
I've always been adorable. I think it's destiny.
The Divine Dragon looked at me!
Why? Why would they do such a thing?
I'm begging, please find it in your hearts to forgive me!
My cakes will burn!
Sigh. Yep, the way the characters are written is not very good. Too many are either annoying or whiny, or you just want to slap them because they are generally unlikable. Also the dialogue. Fire Emblem, I know you can do better.
I wanted to support you, but I'm just being annoying.
There are at least 3 instances where characters used the word cool.
Didn't expect you to be casual. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool trick, huh? That's just cool.
And that made me cringe. I don't like when words like cool and contemporary lingo are used in a medieval fantasy setting.
It's quite cool.
Something I'm also missing is enemy generals that you get to defeat at the end of a battle. Granted, in other Fire Emblem games, they tend to be one-off characters that get briefly introduced and then quickly disposed of. But hey, I think it's motivating to see this is the guy I need to take out, and I will get to do so after a long and tough battle. This game only has a handful. Most of the time, you just keep fighting the 4 hounds over and over again, who are the evil Fell Dragon's top 4 generals, and they always somehow manage to get away for no reason after you defeat them.
I don't care what you call yourselves. You're in our way. Now stand aside!
What I liked in other Fire Emblem games, occasionally, you would have to fight and kill characters that you do not want to fight and kill. And that is a really strong aspect of the series. It shows how messed up war and politics are. Engage, however, mainly gives you very one-dimensional cliched villain characters that act like horrendous monsters most of the time, and when they are finally about to kick the bucket, they try to pull on your heartstrings by either doing badly foreshadowed face turns, or out of nowhere trying to be nice, or give you a sob story, and the way they did it in this game, it just doesn't work in my opinion. In fact, I rarely root for characters' deaths, unless they're like the most vile beings ever, like Walter from Sacred Stones. But he was also a fun villain, because for one, you loved hating him, and he actually got things done, and you saw him commit horrible crimes. Here, I'm rooting for the death of several people who are probably not over the age of 14, and that is definitely not the game's intention. And it becomes even more frustrating when these characters you despise decide to join you. I mean, with most of the characters you have the option to actively let them die in battle, but that doesn't feel right either.
It looks like I'm in the red. I wish I'd had more time to run my shop. Or at least see my family again.
Oh well, for some reason you can give the people at the Somniel a nice little gift of horse dung. I suppose that's the best way to show you don't approve of them. Speaking of the Somniel, in theory, this feature is amazing, because I love the idea of hanging out with the different characters. However, if there's barely any characters you want to hang out with, it loses a lot of its appeal. But not every character is bad. It's just that the ones that stick out negatively outweigh the positive ones. And that is just a shame. There are also plenty of characters that I can either take or leave. It'd be less of a problem if I either liked looking at them or liked the way they are written. As it is, it's just very disappointing.
I'm only crying because I'm so worthless.
But just because, here are a couple of characters that I actually kinda like, or that grew on me, both visually or personality-wise. Etier, a tough, no-nonsense fighter with abs of steel. Vander. Admittedly, I'm not a particular fan of his design, as his beard looks kinda fake. But what can I say? I like the old noble knight trope. Jade. A stoic knight who, despite never smiling or laughing, spends her free time writing funny books. Diamant. The Honorable Prince of Brodia. Lapis. A young woman from a small village who likes crafting things and is also a skilled hunter. Yunaka. A slightly quirky woman with an ominous past. I feel like I should hate her design, but I kinda like it anyway. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because I like stars? I don't know. Morvier. As a member of the Four Hounds, he's actually one of the villains and apparently the only one of the four who's not a murderous psychopath. He's honorable, direct, and gentle in nature. Also, he has a beard. Allchrist. At first, I did not like him at all, due to his constant self-pitying. Heck, his character bio even mentions himself among his dislikes. But he eventually grew on me. He's Diamant's younger brother whose shadow he grew up in, which gave him an incredible inferiority complex. I don't know, there's something about him. There are actually more characters that I kinda like or don't mind, like Zelkov or Chloe, but I guess these are my favorites. Also, I always appreciate characters like Vander and Zafir being there, because having characters in their 50s and 60s who are still more than capable fighters is just something that I find generally cool. Zafir might be a pretty okay character as well, but she joins the party rather late, so I never engaged with her all that much. That reminds me, data miners were able to find out the age of each character. There is a full list that can be found on the Escapist magazine website. Now, that is interesting. Let's have a look. Okay, most of them appear to be in their late teens to early 20s, which seems to make sense. The kids, Anna and Jean, are 11 and 10. Yeah, I guess that tracks. Hortensia is 14. Alright. But wait a second. The annoying twins are 16 years old? I thought they were maybe 13. And Etier is only 17? Yeesh. I suppose not every character can be a grown-up like Roy from Smash Bros. Fame, who is 15? Whew. Well, let's have a look at our elderly characters. Vander is 45. Ah, come on. What about Zafir? My apologies, but this is not how aging works. Yeah. Well, let's get to the verdict. Well, in conclusion, this game is very, very, very good. I was having an amazing time playing it, and felt motivated to pump dozens upon dozens of hours into it. It is a shame though that the story itself is not particularly motivating and kinda lame and predictable, but the gameplay makes up for that. The characters are also a bit of a negative. The art style is a love it or hate it kind of thing. And actually because of that, I decided to ask my good friend CrazyArcadia, who's in the love the art style camp, to say, or rather write, a few words. because I felt it was necessary to get more than one opinion on this. So, I'm gonna read now what CrazyArcadia wrote. Hi there, CrazyArcadia speaking through the ever-relaxing voice of Phil from the Abyss. I like the designs in Fire Emblem Engage. For the sake of my argument, let us take a look at anime designs over the decades. 80s and 90s fantasy anime range from the more dark and mature series like Berserk and Record of Lodoss War to light-hearted comedies such as Slayers and El Hazard. Compared to the very grim styles of the more serious anime, the more cartoony series would go for bigger eyes, bolder colors, and more comedic effects. Fire Emblem as a series goes back and forth with tone and settings, while being close to current anime trends. Certain designs appear in multiple entries, such as the blue-haired hero, the calm green-haired advisor type, and the grey, battle-worn, very old 35-year-old knight. But they look different enough through the style of different illustrators. The later entries went for more light-hearted anime stylistics. Big anime eyes, fan service, bold colors, and they found a lot of success with a more casual and younger anime crowd. Three Houses, the first entry on Switch, dialed back from the looks of the newer entries on the 3DS or mobile. Interestingly, its designer Chinatsu Kurahana was more known for Bishonen drama, with a more female target group. Most characters are wearing their blackish student outfits and the colors of their respective houses. More emphasis was instead given to their faces and hairstyles to distinguish them easily. This was great for storytelling purposes, but it also made the game look a bit bland at times in my opinion. Don't get me wrong though. I really like Kurahana's character designs and their more adult, graceful looks. Engage feels more like the light-hearted sibling to the darker Fire Emblems stylistically, close to popular 2010s anime such as Sword Art Online or Konosuba. This makes sense considering Fire Emblem Engage's artist, Mika Picasso, worked a lot on illustrations for light fantasy novels. We see a return to very unique color schemes and outfit choices in Engage. Those are so easily recognizable that they even work well as small sprites seen on loading screens, and they are full of imaginative modern fashion details and nods to the series' history. In-game, the character models and the cel shading are spot on and some of the nicest I've seen in a while. I can imagine for myself what kind of characters they are and decide on looks alone if I want them in my party or not. For me, this aspect feels closer to older entries of the series, when characters wouldn't talk as much as today. I admit that this also invites a certain superficiality, and I wish they were actually better written. But I cannot blame the character design for mediocre writing. So yes, I like the designs. Alright, thanks CrazyArcadia. So again, the game is incredibly fun, no matter if you like the art style or not. And I can easily recommend it to anyone who likes RPGs and strategy games, no matter if you're a veteran or a newcomer to the series. If you can look past the subpar story and borderline annoying characters. Actually, these might just be problems for experienced Fire Emblem players, because it's simply a deviation from what we are used to. Fire Emblem newbies might not mind it as much, but just find everything a bit generic. I personally find it a bit sad that there was not a single character design that fully grabbed me. Not a single design that made me say, I love this. Not one redeeming. Okay, never mind. Forget what I just said. 10 out of 10. Sorry, no. 11 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider leaving a like, or even subscribing to my channel. Making these videos is actually a huge amount of work. It took me about 100 hours to make this one. So any kind of support would be appreciated. Thanks, and I hope you have a lovely day.